The pond began its life as a gravel pit. Over the years, we were able to take out truckloads of gravel, and we used that to build all of the driveways on the property. We even built a trail in the woods for skidding out logs in the winter. So that was all really good. It was a fantastic resource to have, but sometimes things overstay their welcome. And after 7 or 8 years, we've all gotten sick of looking at a pit in the front yard, so it's time to do something with it. Let's dig a pond. Now, when you think about digging a pond, you're probably picturing an excavator, but my dad decided to do it a little bit differently. He went out on his D21A Komatsu bulldozer and actually pushed all of the dirt out of the pond. By his estimation, the project required moving about 1,500 yards of dirt, which is, if you're not familiar with dirt, that's more than 3 million pounds. So it's a lot of material to move. He pushed that all out by himself, although he did have occasional help. A dog can be very useful for moving material, but you have to make sure to get them aligned in the right direction. As you can see, this is a faulty dog. It is misaligned and it is moving material in the incorrect direction. So watch out for that. This final shot here shows the pond nearing the completion of its excavation phase. This is the rough shape of the project. Phase 2 of the project is measuring. Because this is a gravel pit and the material is rocky, it doesn't hold any water. So we're going to have to put in a pond liner. And to put in a pond liner, we have to measure for that. We started by breaking out the transit and finding the high water mark for the pond. In other words, the point where the pond is going to overflow its banks. Once we have that, my dad could make a mark on a stick and he could go around the entire circumference of the pond, making marks so that we could see the basic shape of the pond. And that allowed him to figure out where he wanted to take out more material or even add back in some material, because some parts of the pond or the marsh he wants to be dry as the summer progresses and the water level goes down. He actually wants that to dry out. So he figured out the shape of the pond. He took material out, we remeasured, and we did this multiple times until he was happy with the shape. And at that point, it was time to measure for the pond liner. So the first step was establishing a center line. Now, this line doesn't have to be perfectly dead center on the pond, but it does have to be consistent. So once you pick your center line, you have to use it for all of your future measuring. So we put a stake at either end. We ran a string between the stakes, and then we gently let the string down onto the ground so we had a straight line. Once we had the straight line, we took the transit and we began measuring in 11-foot 9 segments. So one of the things you'll quickly learn when you're shopping for pond liners is that most of these companies make their liners in 12-foot segments. They have a very large 12-foot roll of this pond liner stuff. We used RPE liner, reinforced polyethylene, the 40 mil variant, which is tougher than the 30 mil variant, extra strength. So they have these 12-foot rolls. They cut them to length and they heat sink, they heat fuse them together, and that's why you get these 11-foot 9 segments, because there's a 3-inch overlap. So we went down the center line measuring in 11-foot 9 segments. We would shoot 90 degrees to the right, 90 degrees to the left, take those numbers, move on, and keep going till we had everything. And here you can see these are my rough measurements with my atrocious handwriting. It's embarrassing, really, but I live with it. And we were able to give those numbers to our engineer, and he turned it into this beautiful picture, which actually looks good. And we gave that picture to the pond liner people. Phase 3 of the project begins when the heavy equipment shows up. We had wanted to rent a JCB 131X excavator, but the rental company was fresh out of them. So instead they sent us this John Deere 160G, which is a fairly large excavator for our project. It's probably bigger than what we needed, but we made the most of it. So we brought the excavator up to the pond site for last minute excavations, and you can also see here that the dog is helping with last minute excavations. This time she is aligned in the correct direction, so we're all making forward progress here. And this is what the pond looks like, basically completed. So the only thing that we have left to do at this point is get the rocks out. We want to take the rocks out so that they don't poke a hole in the pond liner. And to do that, we're going to use a rock hound. A rock hound attaches to the front of the skid steer, and it's basically a bunch of hundreds of these little metal spikes on a conveyor system. And these spikes start spinning, and you drive the skid steer backwards, and as the spikes spin, they chuck all of the rocks into the bucket. And this actually works really well. You can see in this picture, it leaves a perfectly groomed trail, almost completely rock free. So we go over the whole pond with the rock hound, and then my dad also drove over the pond with the roller to hopefully get any rocks that the skid steer didn't pick up. So this is the completed pond here, completely de-rocked and ready for the liner. The liner arrives, and it's conveniently located at the very back of this truck. So we had to wrap a strap around it, then add another strap, then another strap, and then a chain, and attach that to the bucket of the skid steer, and we had to yank this thing out of there. So by the time we did that, the pallet it was sitting on was halfway crushed. It was all dirty. It was a mess, but we got it. We were able to pick it up with the excavator and navigate under the power lines, and then bring it up to the pond for the final preparations. What you're looking at here is the liner all ready to go. You notice the white patch on there. Zooming in, that's the instructions. That's it. I think it was 160 feet down or so. So we just measured down our center line 160 feet. And then we set up the transit and turned the transit 90 degrees to the left. And that let us draw this horizontal line in orange. And that horizontal line is what we're going to unroll the pond liner on. I picked up the liner with the excavator and drove it across the pond and got it in place, and then we started unrolling it right along our orange line. We had to make a few adjustments along the way, but we mostly got it. Came out real nice. And this is really the moment of truth. This is what we've been waiting for. We've done all of this measuring, and we don't know, frankly, if it's going to work. We've done everything we can do to make it work, but we don't know. We've never installed a pond liner before, so this is a new experience for us. We have about 13 guys to help us, which is more or less what the pond liner people recommended. But what we pretty quickly figure out is that we are right on the brink of being able to do this. This pond liner is heavy, and everyone is struggling. Everyone is putting in their maximum just to move it. So I think we all would have loved to have a few more guys there to help us out. One of the things that Nick suggested was flapping or waving the liner up and down to help get some air under it. And so that definitely helped, but it wasn't a magic pill. This was still it was a difficult thing to move. And, one of the issues we actually encountered was that it was hard to hold on to this. So someone actually put vice grips on it. That worked well. Some other people used gloves, and the rest of us ended up with liner knuckle, which is a pretty common affliction in the industry. In the grand scheme, though, a small hiccup. because once we have the liner spread, it's fitting perfectly. Everything has gone according to plan. This has been a massive success. All of our measuring has paid off, and we couldn't be happier with how it turned out. So we have our liner in. Everyone leaves but my dad and I. And, for some people, this is where they're going to leave it. But we're not doing that. We don't want to look at this pond liner. So we have a bunch of dirt to move. We're going to cover up this entire thing. We can use the excavator to dump dirt onto the liner from around the edges of the pond, but we can't drive it onto the liner. The excavator weighs way too much for that, and it has these steel tracks that would tear it up. So most of the work is going to happen with the skid steer. The skid steer with a full load in its bucket weighs 14,000 pounds, which is as much as 2 Cadillac Escalades. But it has these rubber tracks, and we think that it's going to be fine. So we start by building a road. We just dump buckets and keep driving over it, and we're aiming for about 1 to 2 feet of material here, and we think that's enough that the skid steer can drive over the liner and not rip any holes in it. So I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of footage here, because this was about 2 weeks of skid steering, just moving these buckets one at a time. We had about 1,500 bucket loads to move. This picture is about 2/3 of the way complete. We have 2/3 of the pond covered, and it's going well. We've been very lucky to not have much rain, so that's given us a huge boost. And this short clip here is one of the last loads of gravel that will ever come out of the gravel pit. We're just doing a little bit of cleanup work. We're sending that load off to the driveway. And you can see that some of the water is already starting to fill in here, and the pond liner is doing its job, and this is the end of the project. Basically, we have some more touch-ups we'll do next year to really get the final shape in, but this is it. We're looking at a completed project after 6 months. A job well done.